Somewhere in southern France, an air traffic controller is desperately trying to get a hold of the pilot of a Germanwings Airbus A320. The aircraft has tracked perfectly along its route so far, but suddenly it appears to be in a descent. Not an uncontrolled one, but it is gradually deviating from its assigned altitude. What could be the issue here? The controller is getting more worried by the minute, seeing that the A320 is descending right towards the French Alps below. Again and again he tries to talk to the crew of the plane, but no one answers to any call on any frequency. Eventually, the plane disappears from the radar screens. A fighter jet is quickly dispatched to the area of the last radar contact, and quickly the grim reality is revealed. The Germanwings A320 has crashed without ever declaring an emergency. The wreckage is spread over a large, mountainous ravine. No piece of debris is larger than 3 meters, bearing witness to the violence of the impact. Quickly, a team of investigators was dispatched to the remote area, located here in southeastern France. The area was somewhat difficult to reach, since the wreckage was distributed over a mountainside. Still, when the investigators made it there, the team quickly found the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Both were badly mangled, but the data modules seemed intact. The devices were shipped to the headquarters of the BEA, which is the French Bureau of Accident Investigation. First, the flight data recorder was read out, and the investigators were concerned with what they saw. Someone had instructed the autopilot of the A320 to fly straight into the Alps. At first, this raised concerns that the aircraft had been hijacked and crashed by perpetrators. But soon after that, the cockpit voice recorder was found to be in a good enough condition to be read out. I can only imagine what the analysts must have felt at the moment they heard the tape for the first time. Here's the story that it told. Germanwings Flight 9525 took off from Barcelona, Spain at 10 in the morning on March 24, 2015, bound for Düsseldorf, Germany. The first officer was at the controls on his second flight of the day. After about half an hour after takeoff, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Shortly after, the captain asked the first officer to take over all radio communication and control of the aircraft and excused himself to the lavatory. 29 seconds thereafter, the first officer reached for the altitude control knob of the autopilot, turned it all the way to the left to 100 feet, the smallest selectable altitude, and pulled it, thereby commanding the A320 to reduce the engine thrust to idle and commence a descent to 100 feet above sea level. This put the target altitude of the autopilot well below the actual elevation of the Alps, which rise up to almost 16,000 feet in certain areas. It was this change that put the aircraft on a collision course with the ground. A minute and a half later, the first officer reached up for the controls again. This time, he increased the speed of the aircraft, thereby also increasing the rate of descent. At this time, the air traffic controller in charge of Germanwings 9525 asked the crew politely what their cleared altitude was, since it was highly unusual for an aircraft to begin its descent this early. He received no response, not even after repeating his question twice. In the meantime, the first officer further increased the speed and rate of descent of the aircraft. 4.5 minutes after the captain had left the flight deck, he requested access to the cockpit via a small keypad next to the cockpit door. After the events of 9/11, intrusion-proof cockpit doors were mandated. They must be incredibly sturdy and even bulletproof. To request access, a crew member must enter a code on a keypad next to the door. The pilot in the cockpit will then verify the identity of the crew member via several cameras mounted in the door area. If the pilot then deems that the person has access to the cockpit, the door is opened via a toggle switch and the cockpit door can be pushed open. But what if a pilot would fall unconscious while the other pilot is in the lavatory? Even that case is covered. There is an emergency access procedure to enter a cockpit in that case. A secret emergency code can be entered on the keypad. If it is correct, a timer starts counting down 15 seconds, and a loud sound beeps in the cockpit, indicating to the pilot inside that someone is attempting to enter the flight deck via the emergency procedure. After the 15 seconds have elapsed, the door will open for 5 seconds. That is, and this is important, unless the pilot inside decides that this code was entered by someone who has no right to access the cockpit. In that case, the door switch inside the cockpit can be flipped to the lock position, which cancels the emergency access procedure and disables the keypad for 5 minutes. A red light illuminates on the keypad, indicating to whomever had tried to access the flight deck that he or she is now locked out. As I said before, the captain returned from his lavatory break after 4.5 minutes and tried to access the cockpit via the normal procedure. The first officer, however, did not open the door. Instead, he increased the A320 speed to the maximum. During the next 4 minutes, the cockpit voice recorder captured the sounds of the captain and members of the cabin crew knocking on the door and begging for entry. The emergency access procedure was also tried, but the first officer denied entry to the captain and the cabin crew again and again. Meanwhile, the aircraft was descending towards the Alps at maximum speed. In the last 1.5 minutes of the flight, violent bangs on the cockpit door were recorded, along with pleas to the first officer to finally open the cockpit door. The bangs most probably originated from the desperate attempts of the captain to break down the door with a crash axe, which is kept in the cabin for emergency firefighting. However, it was all in vain. From the first officer's microphone, sounds of his slow breathing were recorded, which soon mixed with terrain warnings.
Terrain ahead! Pull up!
At 10:41 and 6 seconds, Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed into the Alps at an altitude of 1500 meters or 5,000 feet. There were no survivors. After it became clear that the first officer had deliberately crashed the A320, the search for the reason behind his actions began. His name was Andreas Lubitz, aged 27. Investigators soon found first irregularities in the career of the first officer. He started his pilot training with Lufthansa in September of 2008, but suspended his training already 2 months later, since he started suffering from a severe depression and suicidal thoughts. When he then showed up for his yearly medical check that every pilot has to undergo, he stated truthfully that he was being treated for depression and that he was taking medication in that regard. As a result, his medical clearance was not renewed. After a total of 8 months, however, Andreas Lubitz's psychiatrists deemed him healed of his depression and advised the aeromedical professionals to renew his flying license. As a result, his medical license was indeed renewed. It however now bore the restriction that the license would be voided if the depression returned. After this, Lubitz completed his flight training with above average grades and began flying the Airbus A320 as a first officer in the end of June 2014. None of the pilots or instructors he flew with in that period noted any concern about his behavior. But just half a year later, in December 2014, the first officer visited several doctors, eye specialists and psychiatrists, stating that he had trouble sleeping and that he was losing his eyesight. All of them agreed that there was no organic reason for his symptoms and that his eyes were perfectly healthy. Instead, he was given a prescription for antidepressants. At this point, he should have self-declared himself unfit to fly, since the use of antidepressants without consultation with an aeromedical specialist is prohibited. The first officer, however, chose to hide this information and continued flying. Over the following months, Lubitz visited several other doctors and psychiatrists as his condition gradually worsened. He reported again and again that he feared losing his vision. Psychiatrists diagnosed a severe depression along with a psychosomatic disorder and put the first officer on sick leave several times. The latter, however, chose not to forward this information to Germanwings and continued flying. On March 10th, 2 weeks before the crash, one of his psychiatrists issued an indefinite note of sick leave along with a referral to a psychiatric hospital treatment because he believed that Lubitz suffered from a psychosis. This illness is characterized by a loss of connection to reality, manifested for example by delusions or hallucinations. It is a rather severe personality disorder which definitely would preclude an individual from operating an aircraft. None of the professionals who treated Lubitz reported his conditions to the relevant authorities, since patient confidentiality is held in a very high regard in Germany. In fact, it would have been legal to disclose the pilot's mental issues, since the threat to public safety most likely outweighed the right of privacy. This was, however, not well known to any of the doctors involved. Lubitz chose to hide his possible diagnosis, did not commence his psychiatric treatment, but instead continued flying as usual, all while taking more and more medication to treat his symptoms. In the end, on March 24, 2015, he was likely overwhelmed by his mental disorders. On the early morning flight from Düsseldorf to Barcelona, he put the autopilot in a descent that would have crashed the aircraft while the captain was outside of the cockpit for a while. The aircraft was in this mode for several minutes until the captain requested to return to the cockpit. This time, Lubitz quickly fixed his change to the autopilot, let the captain in, and nobody was ever the wiser. This is viewed by the team of investigators as the first rehearsal of his suicide. For some reason, he did not go through with it this time. Sadly, his first attempt probably only strengthened his resolve on the second flight. When the captain left the flight deck on the first occasion on the return flight, Lubitz didn't wait long until he initiated the deadly descent of the A320. In the end, he completed his plan and did not stop, even when being implored to do so by the captain through the closed door. According to psychiatrists, he had probably entered a state of tunnel vision at that point, in which he only saw all or nothing options, a common theme in people who want to take their own life. Also, he was probably disconnected from the fact that he was not only going to kill himself, but 149 other people as well. Lubitz's actions are incomprehensible, and nobody will ever be able to fully explain the reasons behind this terrible act. But the accident shines a light on the imperfect human side to aviation, especially the medical fitness part of the pilot's profession. You see, pilots have to undergo a medical check every year in order to retain their permission to fly. No pilot I know looks forward to his medical checkup, because it is one of the very few things that can actually end a career from one day to the next. Many conditions can rightfully spell the end of a life in the air. By law, pilots are required to self-report to an aeromedical professional in case that they feel that their ability to fly might be impaired due to a medical condition. This too applied for First Officer Lubitz when he first started taking antidepressants, or for any of his psychological episodes thereafter. However, he chose not to declare his state of emotional distress, and unfortunately, he finds himself in good company. A study concluded in 2004 looked at 1,200 pilots who had been diagnosed with a depression and who were given a prescription for antidepressants. 60% of these individuals reported that they did not take their medications and continued flying untreated. 15% indicated that they were taking the pills and continued flying, and only 25% would take a sick leave, get treated, and return to flying once healed sufficiently. I hope you see the conundrum involved here. Pilots are required to willingly disclose conditions that can end their career here and now, a job that they not only love, but one that pays the bills and supports their livelihoods. Grounding a pilot often leaves a highly trained specialist without a job, and without many other professional alternatives. There are very few jobs that actually require the skill set of an aviator, and most of the time, extensive retraining on another job is necessary before pilots can work in another industry. For most office jobs, switching from one field to the next is far easier. In addition to that, insurances for the loss of a pilot license are not commonplace, and where they are offered, they are often hugely expensive. Some of the more progressive airlines out there offer a one-time payment in case of medical dismissal, but often they are not much more than a drop in the bucket. In the case of Andreas Lubitz, the payout would have just covered his debts that he took on to cover for his pilot's training, and nothing more. This accident is a sad and incomprehensible one. Only Andreas Lubitz could probably have explained the reasons behind his despicable act, which ended his life and that of the other 5 crew members and 144 passengers. Finding the reasons behind his actions and determining his actual mental state at the day of the accident was further complicated by the fact that many friends and relatives of the first officer chose not to speak to the team of investigators. The committee recommends in the final report on Germanwings 9525 that several aviation practices should be changed. For one, they note that modern antidepressants often generate little to no side effects once they are well dosed and the patient is used to them. Therefore, the board states that aviation medicine should allow pilots to fly, even under the influence of antidepressants, if the individual in question can handle them without major side effects. Furthermore, the board strongly suggests to airlines that they should implement plans to mitigate the socio-economic risks associated with the loss of a pilot's license. All these steps should hopefully help future pilots in distress to be more encouraged to get help if they should need it. It is, by far, no perfect solution, but as with most human factor problems, there probably is no such thing.